J.D. Vance was silent until the very end, and then he showed documents that shocked the whole country. He was one step away from prison, but one sentence was enough to make him a hero of the nation. Post in the comments, where are you watching from? The Supreme Court chamber was a place of solemnity and grandeur, its towering columns and intricate carvings a testament to the weight of justice that had been dispensed within its walls for centuries. Today, however, the air was charged with an unprecedented tension. Cameras lined the back of the room, their lenses trained on the defendant's table, where J.D. Vance, the sitting Vice President of the United States, sat with a calm yet resolute expression. The accusations against him were grave: abuse of power and mishandling state secrets. The stakes were nothing short of monumental, and the nation watched with bated breath as the drama unfolded. Presiding over the case was none other than Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding adherence to the Constitution, Barrett was a figure of immense respect and authority. Her reputation for impartiality and legal precision had earned her the admiration of conservatives and moderates alike, but today her role was far from neutral. She had taken the extraordinary step of personally overseeing the case against Vance, a decision that had sent shockwaves through the political landscape. Once allies in the conservative movement, Barrett and Vance now found themselves on opposite sides of a battle that threatened to redefine their legacies. Barrett entered the chamber with her signature composure, her black robe flowing as she ascended to the bench. Her gaze was steady, her demeanor cold and methodical. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed unequivocally in the sanctity of the law. To her, this case was not about politics or personal affiliations, it was about justice. Yet, the sight of Vance at the defendant's table, a man she had once respected and worked alongside, added an undeniable layer of complexity to the proceedings. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and legal experts. The tension was palpable, the silence broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers or the faint hum of the cameras. Barrett's voice rang out as she called the court to order, her tone firm and authoritative. "We are here today to address allegations of the utmost seriousness," she began, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "The integrity of our government and the trust of the American people are at stake. Let us proceed with the gravity this case demands." J.D. Vance sat upright, his hands clasped on the table before him. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of determination. Vance was a man of action, a patriot who had built his career on the principles of honor, truth, and American values. His charisma and unwavering commitment to the nation had earned him a loyal following, but today he was a man under siege. The accusations against him were damning, and the evidence presented by the prosecution painted a picture of betrayal and misconduct. Yet, Vance knew that the truth was far more complex than the narrative being spun in the courtroom. The opening arguments were delivered with precision and fervor. The prosecution laid out its case, presenting documents and testimonies that seemed to implicate Vance in a series of decisions that had allegedly compromised national security. Barrett listened intently, her expression unreadable as she took notes and asked pointed questions. Her legal acumen was on full display, and her ability to dissect arguments with surgical precision left no room for ambiguity. Vance's defense team, however, struggled to counter the onslaught. The evidence was overwhelming, and the narrative crafted by the prosecution was compelling. The lead attorney, a seasoned litigator, appeared visibly shaken as he attempted to poke holes in the case. Vance, for his part, remained composed, his mind racing as he considered his next move. He knew that the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew that the truth was on his side. The challenge was finding a way to reveal it. As the proceedings continued, the nation became increasingly divided. News outlets framed the case as the downfall of a once promising political figure, while social media buzzed with debates and speculation. Supporters of Vance rallied behind him, insisting that the charges were politically motivated, while his detractors called for accountability and justice. The courtroom had become a microcosm of the broader political landscape, a battleground where ideologies clashed and the future of the nation hung in the balance. Barrett, for her part, remained steadfast in her role as arbiter of the law. Her questions were incisive, her demeanor unyielding. She was determined to uncover the truth, regardless of where it led. Yet, as the case unfolded, she began to sense that there was more to the story than what had been presented. The evidence, while compelling, seemed almost too convenient, too perfectly aligned to paint Vance as the villain. Barrett's instincts, honed by years of legal experience, told her that there was a deeper layer to the case, one that had yet to be revealed. The turning point came when Vance requested to address the court directly. His defense team was hesitant, fearing that his words could be used against him, but Vance was resolute. He knew that the only way to uncover the truth was to confront the accusations head-on. Barrett, after a moment of deliberation, granted his request. The courtroom fell silent as Vance rose from his seat, his presence commanding attention. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I stand before you not as a man seeking to defend himself, but as a patriot committed to the truth. The allegations against me are serious, and I do not take them lightly. But I must tell you, and the American people, that there is more to this case than meets the eye. What you are about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about these proceedings." The room was electric, the tension palpable. Barrett's gaze remained fixed on Vance, her expression unreadable. The nation watched as the vice president prepared to deliver a revelation that would change the course of the trial and the future of the country. The courtroom's austere silence was broken only by the measured cadence of Justice Amy Coney Barrett's voice as she began detailing the case against J.D. Vance. The ambient light filtered through the high, stained-glass windows of the Supreme Court chamber, lending an almost reverent glow to the proceedings. Every eye in the room was fixed on Barrett as she started laying out the prosecution's case with meticulous precision. Her tone was unyielding, her logic unassailable, as she recited the allegations of abuse of power and mishandling of state secrets that had propelled this historic trial into the national spotlight. "Mr. Vance," Justice Barrett intoned, her gaze piercing through the tense atmosphere, "the charges before you are grave and multifaceted. It is alleged that you, by misusing your executive authority and compromising classified information, have violated the public trust vested in your office. Today, we shall review documented evidence, internal communications, policy deviation reports, and testimonies, all of which indicate that decisions made under your guidance strayed far beyond the acceptable limits of executive discretion." Her voice resonated like a measured drumbeat, striking deep into the heart of the matter. She proceeded to reference a series of documents that had been meticulously collected by the investigative unit assigned to the case. One by one, she presented confidential memos and emails that documented a pattern of decision-making wherein Vance had allegedly prioritized loyalties and private interests over his constitutional duties. Images of redacted text and annotations flashed across the public display screen behind her, providing the jurists and the watching nation with a visual accompaniment to her argument. For minutes that felt like an eternity, each piece of evidence, a cryptically worded internal directive, a series of email threads discussing sensitive negotiations, and even an intercepted secure transmission, was examined with surgical accuracy. Barrett's diction was clinical, delineating how these documents, when seen collectively, mapped out a series of missteps. "Consider this memorandum," she said, pointing to a digital copy on the screen, which discusses the reallocation of national security resources without proper oversight. The language here is not one of routine administrative adjustment, but of deliberate circumvention of established protocols. Her tone brooked no argument. This was a recitation of fact, woven into a narrative designed to leave little room for alternative interpretations. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance sat at the defendant's table, his posture appearing increasingly tight and defensive. His legal team exchanged anxious glances as Barrett delved deeper. Every single document was laid bare like pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, painted a damning picture of unilateral decision-making and disregard for legal frameworks. The prosecution had argued that these deviations were not isolated errors but part of a systematic pattern, an exploitation of executive privilege that had compromised national security interests. Barrett's questions continued with unwavering logic. "Do we have a justified reason for deviating from established protocol?" Are these deviations documented as mere administrative anomalies, or do they reflect an intentional subversion of the law? Each query rolled like a tightening noose. Barrett's demeanor was icy and methodical. Her legal argumentation was so precise that, even as the evidence mounted against him, Vance seemed momentarily cornered. His previous veneer of confidence now tarnished by the weight of incontrovertible facts. She cited witness testimonies from high-ranking officials and mid-level bureaucrats who, under protective orders, admitted that key directives from Vance's office had bypassed standard security channels. These are not vague allegations, Barrett declared, but corroborated accounts from those who directly observed the chain of command being subverted. Her voice, steady and irrevocable, reverberated off the stone walls of the chamber. As Barrett continued with her systematic presentation of the evidence, a timeline of emails, cross-referenced financial records corroborating irregular expenditures, and even metadata from classified files, the narrative being constructed was clear. J.D. Vance had, according to the prosecution's argument, overstepped legal boundaries for political expediency. The data on display offered a seemingly unbroken chain of correspondence that, from inception to execution, suggested that confidential strategies were compromised in favor of personal or partisan interests. The prosecution's narrative was bolstered by the sheer volume of evidence. One document after another was presented with the precision expected of Supreme Court proceedings. Barrett's logic was so exacting that each piece of evidence was presented not as an accusation in isolation, but as part of an overarching cascade of events leading to a breach of trust. The room grew heavy with the realization that if these allegations were true, the implications were nothing short of a constitutional crisis. Throughout this methodical exposé, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The flashing monitors, displaying excerpts from secure communications and internal memos, served as a silent witness to the weight of the moment. Vance's face, once composed and defiant, now bore the unmistakable stress of a man who realized that the charges leveled against him were not mere political maneuvers, but a robust, evidence-based assault on his record of service. Yet in that charged moment, as the evidence seemed to mount inexorably against him, a murmur of disquiet began to ripple through the chamber. There was a subtle undercurrent that hinted at the possibility that all was not as it appeared, that nuances might remain concealed behind the polished veneer of the prosecution's case. But for now, Justice Barrett's argument was compelling. Every document, every statement, and every corroborated timeline seemed inexorably to signal a downward spiral into legal invalidity for J.D. Vance. In that hallowed chamber of justice, where every word carried the weight of national destiny, the unfolding accusations were presented in a manner that spared no doubt. Barrett's precise, almost surgical, delivery left little space for rebuttal. At this point in the proceedings, Vance appeared encircled by the sheer force of the evidence, his options narrowing as the relentless logic of the court pressed in on him from every side. The stage was set for what would be a decisive moment, a moment in which the truth, for better or for worse, was about to emerge from the shadows. Outside the marble walls of the Supreme Court, the atmosphere in Washington, D.C. was charged with a feverish intensity. As Justice Barrett's measured recitation of evidence echoed through the courtroom, the news media rapidly spun the narrative into a spectacle of high stakes and betrayal. Headlines splashed across every major network: Vice President Vance on the brink, evidence mounts against a patriotic icon, political career in peril, explosive documents shake Vance's image, and from ally to accused, the fall of J.D. Vance. The nation found itself at a crossroads, with public sentiment slicing cleanly down ideological lines. In newsrooms across the country, anchors debated the implications of the evidence with an urgency that bordered on hysteria. While some pundits warned that this could signal the end of a political career once deemed untouchable, others argued that the case was an orchestrated effort to dismantle a formidable voice of conservatism, a warning shot in a much larger ideological battle. As the story broke, social media became an arena for every conceivable opinion. Twitter feeds burst into life with fervent hashtags such as #VanceFallen, #InnocenceExposed, and #PoliticalWitchHunt trending unpredictably. Chat rooms, Facebook groups, and even niche forums swirled with debates over the authenticity of the documents Barrett had presented. For many loyal supporters of J.D. Vance, the courtroom developments were a bitter pill to swallow. Tweets from ardent backers insisted, "This is a politically motivated attack. J.D. Vance stands for American values, not this deep-seated conspiracy." Echoes of populist cries soon connected with broader narratives of government overreach and partisan manipulation. Forums dedicated to patriotic discourse exploded with messages like, "Defend Vance. Every nation must guard against witch hunts aimed at silencing voices of true patriotism," and videos circulated featuring impassioned speeches calling for a full independent investigation into what supporters described as a conspiracy to destroy a national hero. Across the political spectrum, however, the reaction was far from unified. Progressive analysts and liberal voices welcomed the revelations as the unmasking of entrenched power misuse, a validation of long-held suspicions that even well-respected conservative figures were not immune to corruption. If the facts speak for themselves, then what Vance did not do is engage in reckless state secrecy, argued one prominent commentator on a live cable debate. And this is proof that accountability should stretch even to the highest echelons of power. Meanwhile, moderate voters, trapped in the crossfire of partisan loyalty and a desire for truth, found themselves in a state of disquiet. Every day seemed to bring a new twist to the unfolding saga, leaving them uncertain which side of the ideological fire they inhabited. Polls taken in the days after the initial courtroom proceedings revealed a nation that was deeply divided. In major metropolitan areas, where voters were more likely to consume independent media and engage with critical analyses, a growing contingent believed that the prosecution's evidence, though meticulously presented, did not represent the entire story behind Vance's actions. Some argued that the allegations were symptomatic of an increasing trend, the politicization of the judicial system itself. We now face a scenario where even our revered institutions can be exploited as instruments of political warfare. One survey respondent lamented, articulating the sentiment of a frustrated middle class that was tired of both partisan grandstanding and opaque government procedures. The split in public opinion did not occur in isolation. In conservative think tanks and gala events held in the Rust Belt, friends and allies of Vance fiercely debated the veracity of the case. At one such forum, a veteran political strategist questioned, "Is it possible the very system we trusted has been turned against one of its own? The documents look compelling, but could they have been, selectively, presented to serve an agenda?" These voices, echoing in backrooms and on cable news panels alike, challenged the omnipresent narrative of corruption and betrayal, suggesting instead that a larger, more insidious game was afoot, a game where political advantage trumped truth. Journalists, meanwhile, kept a constant vigil on the proceedings in Supreme Court. Every late-night update on news networks carried a mixture of analysis, speculation, and, at times, outrage. A prominent national newspaper ran an editorial with the stark title, "America at the Crossroads. When Truth Becomes a Target," urging citizens to demand transparency from every branch of government and warning of the dangers of conflating legal processes with political vendettas. Experts on constitutional law weighed in, debating not only Vance's actions but also the ethical implications of using the courtroom as a battleground for ideological warfare. The debate became so pervasive that even international media picked up the story, dissecting its potential effects on global perceptions of American democracy. Within the Supreme Court chamber itself, the proceedings had taken on an almost surreal quality. While Justice Barrett maintained her unwavering facade, observers inside noted moments of uncertainty flickering in her steely gaze. Behind the closed doors of the court's corridors, whispers spread that even esteemed members of the judiciary were beginning to question whether the evidence had been too neatly packaged, if it could somehow be part of a larger political ploy. Nevertheless, on the public front, every revelation was met with polarized cheers or jeers. Television talk shows dedicated entire segments to dissecting Vance's predicament, and late-night comedians turned the saga into a series of biting sketches, further fueling the national discourse. In this maelstrom, J.D. Vance's personal supporters clung to a rallying cry that the case was not just against one man, but against the spirit of American innovation, honor, and truth. Impassioned calls echoed on online platforms, urging those disillusioned by the current state of governance to rise, to demand answers, and to reject what they saw as an overreaching political witch hunt. Conversely, critics of Vance insisted that no one, regardless of past service or patriotism, was above the law. For them, the evidence was a clarion call for accountability, a necessary purge to restore faith in a system increasingly marred by concealed agendas. The public strain was evident not only in heated debates and divided polling numbers but in the palpable anxiety felt by those directly involved in public service. Staffers in Vance's administration were reported to be working around the clock, their faces etched with fatigue and uncertainty as they prepared for the next phase of this high-profile trial. Every headline and every tweet sharpened the sense of crisis. In this whirlwind of conflicting narratives, one fact remained undeniable. The trial of J.D. Vance had transcended the realm of legal proceedings and had become a mirror reflecting the nation's current struggles. It was a case where the integrity of government, the sanctity of the judicial process, and the very notion of American values were on trial. As the evidence continued to mount and the media circled like vultures, the stage was set for a drastic transformation. One that would demand answers not just in the flip of a legal document, but from the collective conscience of a divided nation. The courtroom was steeped in tension as J.D. Vance rose from his seat, his movements deliberate and his expression resolute. The vice president, who had been painted as a man cornered by damning evidence, now stood tall, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the chamber. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, seated at the bench with her characteristic composure, watched him closely, her sharp gaze betraying no emotion. The nation held its breath as Vance prepared to speak, the weight of the moment pressing down on every soul in the room. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice steady and clear, "I have listened intently to the accusations leveled against me, and I do not take them lightly. The evidence presented is compelling, but it is incomplete. What you have seen so far is a carefully curated narrative designed to obscure the truth rather than reveal it. Today, I intend to present the full picture. A picture that will not only exonerate me but expose the forces at play behind this trial." The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Barrett's gaze remained fixed on Vance, her expression unreadable. The cameras zoomed in on the vice president as he reached for a folder on the table before him. He opened it with deliberate care, revealing a stack of documents that had been kept out of the public eye until now. The courtroom murmured in surprise, the unexpected turn of events sending ripples of intrigue through the spectators. "These documents," Vance continued, holding up the first page, "contain evidence of a coordinated effort to undermine the integrity of this administration. They reveal a network of influential figures who have used their positions to manipulate the judicial system for political gain. What you are witnessing today is not a trial of justice. It is a trial of power, orchestrated by those who seek to silence voices that challenge their agenda." The murmurs grew louder, the gravity of Vance's words sinking in. Barrett leaned forward slightly, her sharp mind processing the implications of his statement. She gestured for him to continue, her voice calm but firm. "Proceed, Mr. Vance," she said, her tone carrying the weight of authority. Vance began to present the evidence, his voice unwavering as he detailed the contents of each document. He revealed intercepted communications between high-ranking officials, secret meetings held in undisclosed locations, and financial transactions that pointed to a web of corruption. The documents painted a picture of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the courtroom, a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of democracy. The spectators watched in stunned silence as Vance laid out his case, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. Barrett's expression remained composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. She listened intently, her legal mind analyzing every detail of the evidence presented. The courtroom, once a stage for accusations against Vance, had now become a battleground for truth. As Vance continued, he turned his attention to the prosecution's evidence. "The documents presented against me," he said, "are not only misleading, they are fabricated. Here, I have proof that key pieces of evidence were altered to fit a predetermined narrative. This trial was never about justice, it was about control. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Barrett's gaze hardened, her mind racing as she considered the implications of Vance's claims. She gestured for the prosecution to respond, her voice firm. "Is there any truth to these allegations?" she asked, her tone carrying the weight of authority. The lead prosecutor, visibly shaken, struggled to formulate a response. The courtroom watched as the carefully constructed case against Vance began to unravel, the cracks in the narrative growing wider with each passing moment. Barrett's sharp mind worked tirelessly to piece together the truth, her commitment to justice unwavering. As the session drew to a close, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Vance, once a man under siege, now stood as a beacon of truth, his revelations casting a harsh light on the forces that had sought to destroy him. Barrett, though shaken by the turn of events, remained resolute in her pursuit of justice. The stage was set for a dramatic conclusion, one that would redefine the course of the trial and the future of the nation. In the wake of J.D. Vance's startling presentation, a deep and unsettling silence enveloped the Supreme Court courtroom. The meticulous cascade of documents and intercepted communications had not only rocked the prosecution's narrative, but had also exposed fissures in the carefully orchestrated case. For the first time, Justice Amy Coney Barrett's steely facade wavered, if only imperceptibly, and the room bore witness to the internal turmoil of a jurist who had long prided herself on impartiality and legal exactitude. For several long minutes after Vance finished his damning disclosures, Barrett sat motionless at the bench. Her eyes, previously a mask of unwavering resolve, now betrayed subtle hints of introspection and doubt. In those moments, every whispered murmur in the room felt amplified. The integrity of the judicial process, a pillar she had always defended, was now under scrutiny, and Barrett found herself wrestling with the possibility that her courtroom might have been manipulated by hidden political forces. Finally, breaking the silence that had grown almost palpable, Barrett cleared her throat. Her usually precise articulation was tempered by a somber gravity as she spoke, her voice resonating in a measured yet uncharacteristically reflective cadence. "Mr. Vance, the evidence you have laid before this court is, in its breadth and detail, both surprising and disconcerting," she began, her words echoing off the chamber's ancient stone walls. "It compels us to re-examine every assumption we have held about these proceedings and the integrity of the evidence that was initially presented." Her admission rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution shifted uneasily, knowing that Barrett's acknowledgement cast a shadow over the narrative they had so painstakingly constructed. On the other side of the aisle, Vance's supporters murmured in cautious hope, sensing that the tide of judicial credibility might well be turning. Barrett continued, her voice growing firmer as she addressed not only the evidence but also the broader political context. "It appears that what has been presented to us thus far may not be the entire truth, and, indeed, I now have reason to believe that parts of the evidence may have been selectively curated to mislead this court." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "I have always maintained that the law must be our beacon, untarnished and unswayed by external influence. However, in light of these revelations, it becomes clear that this case has been manipulated by forces far beyond a simple legal dispute." The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense as murmurs spread among the gathered attorneys, journalists, and onlookers. Barrett's measured tone carried both regret and resolve. In a voice that mixed legal rigor with human vulnerability, she added, "I must confess that I, too, have been drawn into this contested narrative. I believed in the evidence as it first appeared, a body of work that supported the charges against Vice President Vance. Yet, when faced with this new compendium of documents and verified communications, I am compelled to acknowledge that we may have been ensnared in a political operation designed to discredit a leader whose service has been synonymous with American values." Her admission was a turning point. In the decades-old chamber where the law supposedly reigned supreme, her candid acknowledgement of error, or at least of manipulation, resonated as a tremor that signaled significant change. Barrett's statement, delivered with all the gravitas of a master jurist aware of the delicate balance between duty and truth, set an unanticipated precedent. Not only was she recanting aspects of the procedure, but she was also daring to signal that the institution she represented was not immune to the corrosive influence of politically motivated machinations. "I hereby order a temporary recess while we re-examine the evidence," Barrett declared, her voice echoing with the weight of constitutional responsibility. "This is not a decision born from partisanship, but from the imperative to ensure that every strand of evidence is subject to rigorous scrutiny. No matter how high the office, no one is above the law or the truth." In that moment, the courtroom transformed into a crucible of accountability. Supporters of Vance, who had harbored quiet hopes for vindication, erupted in cautious applause. Conversely, those who had considered the charges ironclad now exchanged uncertain glances, their certainties shaken by Barrett's somber recognition of potential abuse in the process. The intermingling of shock, relief, and apprehension was palpable. Journalists in the gallery jotted down every inflection of Barrett's tone, understanding that her words would redefine not only the ongoing trial, but also the national debate over political fairness and judicial integrity. Behind closed doors, even members of the Supreme Court staff whispered about the implications of Barrett's statement. It was a reckoning, a moment when the cold armor of policy gave way to the sometimes painful reality that the legal system, despite its venerable traditions, could be manipulated by those with enough power and determination to wield political influence as a tactical weapon. Outside, the news media buzzed with this unexpected development. Analysts debated whether Barrett's newfound candor was a moment of genuine corrective action or a calculated move to salvage the legitimacy of the court. Editorials began to appear under headlines such as "A Reckoning in the Halls of Justice" and "When the Shield of Law Cracks, Barrett's Moment of Truth," reflecting a nation that watched as two of its most prominent figures, one a seasoned jurist, the other a charismatic patriot, grappled with the turbulent intersection of truth, power, and ideology. In that charged aftermath, Barrett resumed the trial, her eyes now reflecting a sober determination to peel back the layers of political intrigue. Her voice, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, had evolved into one that embraced the complexities of modern governance. "We owe it to the American people to uncover the whole truth," she pronounced, her tone resonating with renewed commitment. "Our institutions must be sanctuaries of truth, not battlefields for partisan warfare." As the session progressed, the re-examination of evidence began in earnest. Barrett's acknowledgement of manipulation became the catalyst for an intensive review that promised to reshape the course of the trial. For J.D. Vance, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Where once he had appeared encircled by relentless accusations, he now sensed that the scales of justice were beginning to tip in his favor. And for the nation, a deeply divided electorate perched on the knife edge of political revolution, this admission was a poignant reminder that even the highest pillars of power were, all too human, vulnerable to the pressures of expediency and political maneuvering. What had begun as a determined prosecutorial assault was now turning into an inquiry into a vast, corrosive network of political manipulation. The revelation would set the stage for the next phase, a decisive moment wherein Vance, armed with irrefutable evidence and bolstered by his own unyielding patriotism, would aim to reveal an even larger conspiracy, the kind that not only vindicated his actions but also redefined American political discourse. The Supreme Court chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of the cameras capturing every moment of the trial's climactic phase. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, seated at the bench, had spent hours meticulously reviewing the evidence J.D. Vance had presented. The weight of the revelations had shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom, transforming it from a battleground of accusations into a crucible of truth. Barrett's expression, once cold and unyielding, now carried the faintest trace of introspection, a sign that the truth had pierced through the carefully constructed narrative. As the session resumed, Barrett addressed the courtroom, her voice steady but tinged with gravity. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented by Vice President Vance, and it is clear that the integrity of these proceedings has been compromised. The documents and communications reveal a coordinated effort to manipulate the judicial process for political gain. This is a matter of profound concern, not only for this trial but for the sanctity of our legal system." Her words reverberated through the chamber, eliciting murmurs from the spectators. The prosecution, visibly shaken, struggled to maintain composure as Barrett continued. The allegations against Vice President Vance, while serious, cannot be upheld in light of the evidence presented. This court finds that the charges were based on fabricated and misleading information, designed to serve the interests of those who seek to undermine the principles of justice. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and applause. Vance, seated at the defendant's table, exhaled deeply, his composure unwavering. He had fought not only to clear his name but to expose the forces that had sought to destroy him. Barrett's acknowledgement of the truth marked a turning point, not just for the trial but for the nation. Barrett's voice grew firmer as she delivered the verdict. This court hereby declares Vice President J.D. Vance not guilty of all charges. Furthermore, we will initiate an independent investigation into the individuals and entities responsible for the manipulation of this trial. Justice must prevail, not only for the accused but for the integrity of our democracy. The chamber erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the hallowed halls of the Supreme Court. Vance rose from his seat, his presence commanding as he addressed the courtroom. Your Honor, I thank you for your commitment to the truth. This trial was never about me. It was about the principles that define our nation. Let this moment serve as a reminder that justice cannot be silenced, and that the truth will always prevail. As Vance exited the courtroom, the crowd outside erupted in cheers. Supporters waved flags and held signs proclaiming his innocence, their voices a chorus of hope and resilience. The media captured every moment, the headlines shifting from accusations to redemption. Vance vindicated, a victory for truth and justice. Vice President emerges as national hero, and Barrett's bold decision redefines judicial integrity. In the days that followed, Vance addressed the nation in a televised speech. Standing before a backdrop of the American flag, he spoke with the conviction of a leader who had faced the depths of adversity and emerged stronger. My fellow Americans, he began, this trial was not just about me. It was about the values that unite us as a nation. Honor, truth, and justice are the pillars of our democracy, and we must protect them at all costs. Let this moment inspire us to renew our commitment to transparency, accountability, and the principles that make our country great. Barrett, too, addressed the public in a rare statement. Her tone was measured, her words reflective. As a jurist, my duty is to uphold the law and ensure that justice is served. This trial has reminded us that even the most revered institutions are vulnerable to manipulation. We must remain vigilant and steadfast in our pursuit of truth, for it is the foundation of our democracy. The trial of J.D. Vance had transcended the realm of legal proceedings, becoming a defining moment in American history. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and the unyielding power of truth, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, justice could prevail. The nation, inspired by the courage of its leaders, began to heal, united by the shared belief that the principles of democracy were worth fighting for. In the days following the verdict, the nation's pulse quickened with a sense of renewal, a collective exhale after decades of disillusionment with politics run amok. As the echoes of gavel strikes and impassioned speeches receded from the halls of the Supreme Court, the dedicated leadership of J.D. Vance and the sober reflection of Justice Amy Coney Barrett continued to shape the destiny of America. J.D. Vance, whose name had once been synonymous with ambition and patriotism, now stood at the forefront of a revitalized national discourse. In a historic televised address broadcast to millions, Vance appeared before an American audience united by hope and a common desire to reclaim the integrity of government. Standing beneath the proud expanse of the American flag in a grand auditorium awash in the warm light of an autumn afternoon, he began, "Fellow Americans, today we have witnessed a moment that transcends battles between political factions. I stand before you not merely as a man absolved of wrongful charges, but as a servant of this great nation, one whose values are etched in the enduring commitment to truth and transparency. For too long, our democratic institutions have been shaken by forces that seek to twist the law into a weapon of partisan strife. This trial has revealed not only my personal vindication, but a deep fissure within the system, a manipulation that threatened the very principles on which our country was built. His words resonated with a sincerity that pigeonholed time itself. He drew upon the evidence that had emerged during the trial, citing specific documents and testified exchanges that uncovered political machinations, and he emphasized that these revelations were not the work of an individual antagonist but of an extensive network of influence. It is incumbent upon each and every one of us, Vance continued, to remain vigilant. Let us use this turning point as a foundation for reform, a touchstone that is built on accountability, renewed faith in our institutions, and a reaffirmation of the values that have long made America a beacon of liberty. As his address unfolded, audiences across the country, on television screens, in community centers, and even in local living rooms, felt a seismic shift. Vance's appeal to collective patriotism, underscored by hard data and his personal pledge to the truth, reminded citizens that leadership must be measured not by posturing or privilege, but by the tangible upliftment of the people. His message was a clarion call to all citizens to engage actively in the ongoing restoration of transparency, demanding that every public office, regardless of rank, be held up to the light of accountability. Simultaneously, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, whose decision to pause and reassess the evidence had sent shockwaves through the judicial community, addressed her peers in a somber but resolute public statement. In an exclusive address delivered before a congregation of fellow jurists, legal scholars, and administrative leaders gathered in a stately forum at the Capitol, Barrett acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the proceedings. Today, I have taken a hard look at what our revered institutions have come to embody, she stated. It is not enough to simply administer the law, we must also guard against the corruption that can creep into its corridors. The manipulation of evidence and the exploitation of judicial processes for partisan ends strike at the heart of our democracy. We must now, more than ever, renew our commitment to the ideal that justice is blind only to bias and holds truth as its guiding star. Her reflections were measured and candid, an admission that even the most disciplined institutions are susceptible to external pressures when the stakes are high. Barrett's words, delivered with her customary clarity and authority, were lauded by legal experts for their call to collective self-examination. In recognizing that our process was, at times, co-opted by political maneuvering, we open the door to systemic reform, she observed. It is our sacred duty to ensure that the law remains both a bulwark against tyranny and a mirror reflecting our highest ideals. As the nation processed these twin declarations, from a national hero who had stared down false evidence with steadfast integrity, and from a Supreme Court justice who embodied the struggle for judicial purity, a potent transformation began to take root. The trial, which initially had been framed as the potential downfall of a patriotic leader, had instead evolved into a watershed moment for American democracy. Headlines in newspapers and digital platforms alike transformed from cautionary tales of partisan treachery into optimistic pronouncements of renewal. Vance's triumph, a victory for truth and accountability, and Barrett's judgment sparks call for judicial integrity. Citizens from all walks of life gathered in town halls, community centers, and online forums to discuss the implications of these events. In these discussions, the case quickly became more than a legal matter. It grew into a broader debate about the need to purge the political system of manipulative practices and to return to principled governance based on reason, evidence, and respect for constitutional values. Political leaders on both sides of the aisle began to hint at comprehensive reforms, pledging to restore oversight, align policies with results, and ensure that those who wield power do so under the vigilant gaze of public scrutiny. For J.D. Vance, the day's victorious pronouncement marked not just a personal vindication but the emergence of a movement, a call to arms for every American who felt disenfranchised by a system too often corrupted by political expediency. His message was clear. This is not just a victory in court. It is a turning point for our country. We have exposed a network that sought to pervert justice for its own ends, and we will continue to fight until every corner of our government reflects the enduring values of truth, honor, and service. In closing, both leaders resonated on a single, unifying theme, a profound belief that the truth, when pursued relentlessly, can indeed overcome even the most entrenched systems of power. As the final words of the day echoed across the nation, matted beneath a banner of new beginnings, A single message emerged from the storm. This is not just a legal victory. This is the moment when truth overcomes the system. Subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more stories where conscience triumphs over power.